So welcome to this Dynamic Boards NED Community Meetup. I'm Michelle Baker and I'm a career NED, currently holding Senior Independent Director at a mid-sized housing association. I'm a board member at a care and support organisation and I'm a trustee for 2 small charities. So our topic for today is tips on your first year as a chair. And our speaker today is Stephen Mitcham. His extensive executive career includes serving as Chief Executive of Cambridge Building Society for over 12 years. His non-executive career began whilst he was still working full-time as a trustee of a local charity, and he has since expanded to include roles with organisations such as Money Facts Compare, Mutual Vision, Progressive Building Society and Bevan Money, where he also serves as chair. So, Stephen, over to you.
Thank you. And probably the first thing I wanted to kick off by saying is that I can honestly say I didn't start off wanting to be chairman. And I think it's, for many of us, you evolve to be a chairman rather than it's what you aim to do. You want to become a good NED, and then situations arise within the boards that you're in, and suddenly you find yourself thrust into those positions. But I found it quite a useful trigger when I was asked to do this talk, in putting it together, in what shapes your thinking as a chairman when you go into it for the first time. And I think the thing that struck me is I think I've just tried to use what I'd already learned, because the idea that the chairman is somehow different from being an executive or even being a non-executive board member is not actually that different. I think whenever you go into a new role, you always join up your past experiences. And I think you rarely just drop into it and think, I'm going to be something different. I think the big thing I found is you just pick up on what you've seen other people do and other people you do well. And I think you undoubtedly reject some things and keep some things in your mind. I think the first thing I reflected on when I became a chairman was the fact that, very similar again to when you take on an exec role, is you don't pick your team. Your team is given to you. And you've got this team of hopefully diverse individuals. And I think it's your job to make sure that you can get the most out of them. And that was the first guiding light that I took into it as well. But I think reflecting back on the people who've been the chairs that I've worked with, I think they had some really common features. And I think I'll try to bring them into all of the jobs that I do, because the jobs that I do, I clearly have a financial element to them, but the cultures in each of the businesses are very different, and the cultures in the boards are very different as well. So I think reflecting back, the thing that I found every chair that I respected and thought did a good job was that they cared about the business. And not only did they care about the business, they really cared about the people that were in that business, and it exuded almost from every pore in their body. And I thought that for me, they were the people who understood the mission and the vision of the business really well. They didn't just parachute in once a month and sort of impose themselves onto the business. They tried to live and be that business as well. I think the other thing that I would reflect back on, and I've tried to bring into my first year, is building that trust with the chief exec. I'll always go back to my first conversation with, probably when I first took over as Cambridge Building Society, the chairman said to me, which do you think is the most important relationship in this business? And I gave him about 5 answers, none of which were the ones that he was looking for, which was the chief exec and the chairman. If your chief exec and your chairman can't get on and can't speak freely, not agreeing on everything, but speaking freely, I think the business is in a very difficult position. And from past experience and seeing colleagues as well, if you don't get on with the chairman, ultimately, he does also as well have that remit to move you on as well. So for the chief exec, it really is an important relationship. I think the other thing as part of that good chairmen do is they articulate their expectations and targets, and not just around the monetary targets, but how they want you to act, how they want you to be. And I've never yet met a chairman that is happy for you to give them surprises on board day. The absolute mantra that every good chairman I've worked for is no surprises, and keep the communication going between you. And that's something that I would say I would absolutely insist on now, that if I turn up into meetings and something pops up at that meeting of substance that I don't know about, that is extremely difficult for everybody to deal with. I think the other thing that I've tried to do as chairman is to make sure that everybody has a role in the board and everybody has the freedom to speak. But I do expect discipline on the board as well. I do expect the discipline about people remembering, particularly from the NEDs, what their remit is. They aren't executive and they're not there to be executive. And it's so easy when you come from roles where you've had a real hands-on approach to not too often want to help. And I think that's part of the role of the chairman, is to make sure that you stamp that out. And probably also as well, just reflecting back on things that I've seen other chairmen do well and do badly as well, is making sure that cliques don't develop on boards. It may sound a small thing, but it can be so dispiriting for people if after every meeting there's little groups going off and plotting. And I do think part of the chairman's role is to stamp that out. I also as well have, coming from a regulated industry as well, where board meetings are quite disciplined in terms of timing, etc. I do push people to make sure that they've done the simple things. And it does sound so simple when you write it down, but you go to so many meetings where people haven't read their papers and they're not actually prepared for the meetings. And one of the things is, you'd be amazed, and I'm sure you've seen it yourselves, is how many times you go to a meeting and somebody rolls in either dead on time or 5 minutes late, and the disruption that has to the meeting. So as a chair, I try and sort of impose and encourage, shall we say, to make sure that that happens as well. I think, as I said at the start there, I've tried to learn from past chairmen, and I'm sure if you became chairman of any business, you'd think back about people that you'd respected and people that did a good job. But I think it's easy to go into it and think, well, I already know what I'm doing. I've done lots of different jobs. I know what I'm doing. But I've learned so much from being chairman in the last year, 18 months. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is that every board is so different, and you've got to be prepared to adapt as chairman to make the most of that board. And I'll give you the example that I come from a very regulated industry, which is obsessed by keeping the regulator happy and obsessed with keeping records, etc. And I went into an IT business, which is much more free format, much more entrepreneurial, and it wound me up massively. I found it really difficult to go to such disorganized, what I thought were disorganized meetings. But actually, when I tried to impose the disciplines, etc., that I've talked about earlier, you realize that you're actually stifling innovation there as well. So it's interesting how you go into it thinking that, oh, well, I've got certain things that I must do. What you realize, you've got to be prepared to adapt and deliver. And it took me back to something that I mentioned earlier, is it's understanding the mission and vision for that business. If your business is all about making sure you keep people's money safe, then yes, you need to be very formal and very regulated. But if some ways it's bringing out new ideas and new concepts, I think that's a very different thing. And I think as a chairman, you've got to understand that and get below that. I think I've also seen in businesses that I've chaired, I've gone through periods where boards have been fractious, where they've been at loggerheads with each other and everybody having such different ideas. And that's different than having a diverse range of thoughts. It's where things become fractious and split. And I think the thing that I've learned from that is you can't let that fester for too long. You have to do something about it. And if you have to have unpleasant conversations with people, and I think unpleasant conversations with people is often a euphemism for saying you have to let people go. And it's the flip side that sometimes being a chairman isn't always fun. You do have to do things that other people want you to do, wouldn't want to do. I think the other thing I would highlight as well as being chair, as you go into it, is as you step up, even from being a non-exec director, I'd say this to non-exec directors, but even more so to chairs, is your word is very powerful to the exec. So if you happen to say, oh, I was thinking about this, or I was thinking you might want to look at that, what you're actually saying is you will now go away and spend time on it. You will now go away and do some work on it, because you're the chairman and people want to make sure that the chairman's getting what they want. So I would say just be aware when you go into your first role how powerful your words are as well. And don't be surprised if you say something at a strategy day later in the year or something, you suddenly see your idea or suggestion being put forward as, well, we all know you would like this to happen, when really you were just throwing in a thought. I've mentioned about don't let problems fester, being prepared to act, so I'll just reiterate that as well. I think the other area that it's very easy to get tied up with is thinking about the chief exec, the executive team, how you're going to run the board meetings, what the various non-exec directors need and want you to deliver to help them achieve. But I think the other thing you have to remember, and again, I've learned from not giving this enough attention, was remembering there are owners of the business. All the business I work for are either family-owned businesses, shareholders, or even some of them are mutual businesses. So each of them is slightly different, and you've got to, and as chairman, you need to understand that it's your job to manage that, the shareholders or the owners of the business as well. I think what it strikes me is there's a sweet spot for a chairman, and it's getting balance, and it's about, I think you're there to make sure that you've got an achieving and delivering chief exec. So there's a coaching and a mentoring role there. You've got to make sure you've got very content owners, because having discontented owners is very, very bad for the business. And I think at the same time, in the part of that sweet spot, you're looking to make sure that you've got a coherent and productive board of directors. And again, it sounds so easy to say, but I think that is what you're striving for. And without wanting to sort of labour the point, I would say being a chairman absolutely isn't rocket science. It's just about reworking the people skills that you've got, learning as you go along. And I would probably sum it up as quiet leadership. Rather than forceful leadership, it's quiet leadership. And I think, Michelle, I'm going to finish there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was really insightful. And I know it's a challenge to get everything into those 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So now we're going to reflect on our own NED experiences and views. So we've prepared 2 questions for you to think about. The first one, they've both been shared in the chat already. The first one is, what would be the most challenging aspect of chairing your organisation? And who owns the culture, the executive or the chair? So we're going to take the next few minutes of quiet reflection time to consider our views, and then we'll jump into the breakout room. So if we all just enjoy some thinking time for a few minutes.